So, yeah, I mean, it's just stuff that's going over the girls. Nice to see you. Yeah.
I'm so confident that I came up with. You're not the only one that does see. So he's not here. It must be. Yes, you're reading. It's very rare. Fun things for them.
How are you? You don't have to admit it. Oh, this is Sharon. And she's from London. I didn't know. That's how
He's a free commissioner.
Oh, wow.
I'm gonna be on the panel, so.
I'm looking for a fork now. Right, first ballot, right by the sign-in sheet. Please sign in if you did.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the University of Michigan Detroit Center. We'll get started in our program in about 5 minutes. So for our panelists, I'll ask them to come on up to the stage, make their way up to the stage. You don't have to rush to the stage. Kind of make your way up to the stage. And the rest of you just relax, enjoy your salads, and we can start with our program very, very soon. You need to use the restroom. For those of you who are not familiar with the Detroit Center layout, or the building layout, you go out the door to your left, out to the main hallway, then your right, and your left, and the restrooms are down there. Thank you. We'll get started, Rachel.
Yeah, he's around there. I'm trying to identify it. Pretty cool and wonderful.
Grab those, say the ginger ale. Yes, and then bring it out.
My daughter asked me to grab swim and I pulled her to church. We are going out to give our sermon today. Spread the That's right.
Well, I should actually say. 69%.
That's great. Priorities. Right.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Sorry, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay? All right. So again, welcome to the University of Michigan Detroit Center. We are a co-working and event space right here in the heart of Detroit that services all three campuses of the University of Michigan. And I'm very happy to say we have folks from all three campuses here tonight, because I've been talking to you as you come in, and very, very happy to see you all here. My name is Paul Draus. I'm the faculty director here at the University of Michigan Detroit Center. I'm also a professor of sociology at the University of Michigan Dearborn, so I'm covering bases for two campuses here tonight. Also want to introduce my colleague in the back, Theo Ship III. He's running the camera, say hi to you. So we're a two-person crew here tonight, so if there's something you need, ask us, but have patience. We will get to it as we're able. We're very happy tonight to have a distinguished panel with us to discuss a topic which is on many people's lips these days, or so it seems, the topic of DEI. We call this demystify DEI because we've kind of taken on the theme here at the University of Michigan Detroit Center of demystification, and we're working on demystifying the university for folks here in the local community, but also, demystifying Detroit or different aspects of Detroit for people that come to Detroit with all kinds of different ideas and perceptions and preconceptions about the city. So we're working on a collective long-term project of helping sort of interpret and disentangle a lot of the complex realities here in the city. And so we regularly invite folks from the community to come in and speak on different issues and topics. And we also, of course, have a great wealth of talent, expertise, and knowledge to the University of Michigan. So we're actually very happy to have both represented here today, community and university. And of course, all of us are part of community, whether we're in university or not, right? We're also members of community as well. So I'm going to do like a formal introduction of our three panelists, and then I will kick off our discussion with a more of a DEI type introduction for everyone. And we'll start digging into this idea of what is DEI, why are people talking about it, and why are they talking about it in such different ways, and what can we do to both debunk some of the disinformation that's out there, but also have a critical conversation about what DEI is, where it comes from, and what it's intended to accomplish. So on the far left of our stage, we have Dr. Robert Sellers. Dr. Sellers is the Charles D. Rubin Collegiate Professor of Psychology and Education at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Dr. Sellers' primary research activities have focused on the role of race in the psychological lives of African Americans. Dr. Sellers has won numerous awards in recognition for his scholarship, mentoring, and service. From July 2014 to August 2022, Dr. Sellers served as the Vice Provost for Equity and Inclusion, Chief Diversity Officer at the University of Michigan. As Vice Provost for Equity and Inclusion, Chief Diversity Officer, Dr. Sellers was responsible for the supervision and implementation of the university's first 5-year strategic plan for diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's the DEI. He currently serves as the principal investigator for the Michigan Program for Advancing Cultural Transformation, or MPACT, in the biomedical and health sciences. MPACT is working to hire 30 new faculty at U of M with a demonstrated commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the health sciences over the next 5 years. So very ambitious goals, that program, and a lot of work already behind them. So we also have with us Dr. Jessica Garcia, the founder and CEO of Hummingbird Solutions, LLC, a diversity and inclusion consulting firm. In this role, Garcia offers business and community members the tools and resources to create and sustain inclusive environments for their employees, clients, and constituents. She has consulted with and trained thousands of participants across a wide range of industries in the public and private sectors, providing interactive, customized services on topics such as best business practices, implicit bias and microaggressions, bystander intervention, inclusive leadership, allyship, inclusive teaching, self-care, and wellness. In addition to her work with Hummingbird Solutions, LLC, Garcia has served as a diversity, equity, and inclusion manager for the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts, or LSNA, so we call it at the University of Michigan, since 2018. Prior to joining the University of Michigan, Garcia had a joint position in the Department of Sociology and Office for Inclusion and Interracial Initiatives. And this is the part we're going to get really inclusive at Michigan State University. Well, we welcome everybody here. Thank you for Detroit. As our guest last week, Darryl Wood says, I'm not an R or a D, I'm a Detroit grad. It's kind of how we are in the Detroit Center. She earned her bachelor's degree and doctorate from Michigan State University in sociology. I was very happy to see that. So, another sociologist amongst us. And finally, here on the left, we have Steve Spreitzer. Steve is the co-executive director of the Michigan Roundtable for Diversity and Inclusion, an 83-year-old social and racial justice organization. Steve received his master's in social work Michigan State University, where he focused on community organizing for social justice. He was recently recognized by Cranes for his work in the DEI field, with previous recognition including the Hindu American Foundation, World Sabbath for Religious Reconciliation, the Michigan Muslim Community Council, and the Interfaith Leadership Council of Southeast Michigan. So let's just welcome all of these. So, we might start out with a question on this, we're going to break the ice. So I'm going to ask each of my panelists, and this will decide who wants to go first. Tell us, what do you bring with you to a desert island? And why? One thing.
Rock, paper, scissors. good stuff.
Took it all the way up, see it works.
Here we go. Okay, I'll go first. Sure. I'm gonna go with Swiss Army knife. And the answer is that if I've learned anything in this work, it's that it cannot be done alone, and there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Okay, and the other rule is you can't take the same thing that somebody else is taking. Okay, who's next?
Yeah, I think I would bring a keen concern to know about people, the other species, the resources on the island, just knowing how much, like you had said, I will need to coexist with them. So that's what I would bring on a good day.
Okay, a non-material thing, okay, it's still very important.
I would bring a helicopter pilot with a pilot off the island if I needed to. I could still.
This is why I was in charge and I'm not.
He's already anticipating the next question, which is how would you work together to get off the island? How would you bring together your different gifts, right? Or your different tools, right? And work together in order to get off the island. And I'm understanding that because, of course, if you do team building workshops, we need sort of DEI, we're all kind of used to these types of exercises. I want to start with that now because it's an aerospace icebreaker, as we say sometimes. But really the important thing there is the focus is on how do we learn to work together, right? And so building from that, I'm going to ask each one of you, we're going to start with Steve, to my left. To provide some background, I did a formal introduction, but I'd like to provide you with a personal introduction to the work that you do, by describing sort of your entry point to the domain of DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion. Or as some people sometimes say, what brings you to this work in this space?
Well, thank you. Is this on or working or? Yeah, just, my friend Anthony, who I talked with earlier, I kind of went over some of this, but I briefly, oddly, I was, as I was being raised in the largest white city in the United States, Livonia, I was physically abused by my father, who had a lot of anti-black bigotry. That plays out because I come into this work wanting to make sure no one is harmed because of their identity. And the roundtable, which, as we mentioned, is 83, and Rod also knows about that organization, but it began to fight bias, bigotry, and racism in 1927. It was that no one should be harmed because of their identity. So I'm in a spot that it's like my destiny. But I also come with the racial and social justice background and apply that to this space as well. So we're getting a little confused, and I'm like, I want to bug it. I think I'm supposed to bug it.
I just want to make sure we're ready to move.
Sorry, Curtis was trying to say batteries. We're getting some batteries.
Are you sure? Okay, so I get asked this question a lot because I'm white. So the shortest answer is that I was raised in an interracial family, starting at the age of 3 years old. My mother remarried. My stepfather and his family are African American. And in the late 70s, early 80s, that was a novel idea. And so I spent my whole life thinking about diversity and inclusion and how my family was different from other families, but also about how even within our family, the opportunities and the challenges that we experienced were different because we had different identities. And so, I learned a lot growing up, but I didn't have a name for that. I didn't have theories. I didn't have data to explain to me what I was observing and what I was experiencing until I got to college. The first class that I took in sociology was a race and ethnicity class. And it just opened, it was like all the keys to the kingdom in that class, where I finally understood what was happening, and especially the experiences that my stepfamily was having that I would hear about all the time. In particular, my stepfather coming home with his stories about being the only Black man in the boardroom, the only Black member at the country club, the only Black resident in our subdivision, and that is still true today where they live. My stepfather being the only Black student in his high school who was popular because he was also the best athlete. So there were all of these stories that I didn't understand until I got to college, and then my education kind of mapped that out for me. From there, it made perfect sense. This was the trajectory I was going to do. And my PhD in sociology actually was looking at the role of racial segregation in campus housing on student friendships. And of course, it had a very real impact on who students were going to be friends with, because that's where they spent the most time. But what I also found in that research is that if students were exposed in the classroom to opportunities to engage, to interact, to work together with other students who are different from them, it actually offset the experiences that they were having in the residence. And so for me, what I came to understand at that moment is that faculty and structures have something much more important to contribute to student development than just imparting knowledge. That they could change their whole lives and their relationships and their passions and their values just by setting their classrooms up in very intentional, inclusive ways. And so that's where I started. I started exploring that, started researching that, what does that take? And eventually it evolved into also thinking about how could we also do that in the work environment? Because it's the same at every stage in life, not just in the classroom for students, but in every work environment. And so I continue to use that to this day, but my family will always be the foundation. They know I'm here tonight. They're so excited that I'm here tonight. And I feel so privileged to have had this kind of upbringing to shape me into the person that I am today.
Can you hear me? Okay. I've had a pretty similar experience in terms of it really starting from the beginning with regards to family. I was blessed to have the two best parents anybody could possibly have. While what they did was way before DEI and even social justice, they were both community activists. My father was a minister. My mother was a nurse by training, and then went back, got her master's, and founded a community health center in the community in which she grew up. I learned early a lot of the concepts that we take for granted now, issues of structural racism, issues of racial segregation and its impact in health, education, environment, et cetera. And I remember as a kid going to meetings in places similar to the Detroit Center, where folks in the community were strategizing in terms of how to get more access to healthcare in the community, how to get how to deal with police brutality in the working with representatives, political representatives, trying to find ways to put pressure with regards to businesses, et cetera. That was just how we lived. That was, I tell people all the time, there was never a time where there wasn't somebody in the house that was not a part of the family officially. So mother would come home, someone, maybe in a situation with a crisis with a broken family, abuse, come stay at the house. Someone lost her job. I remember my mother finding out my mother was in jail because the young kid was being arrested, and she asked why and wanted to know where they were taking him, et cetera, and they ended up arresting him. So for me, all of that was just the way that one is supposed to live. And then the other side of that, and I'll shut up because I can go on for a while, is So understanding within the community how much we have to offer. Oftentimes, when we frame issues of justice and we frame issues of DEI, we sometimes fall into the trap of focusing on DEI as if it is important as morally right thing to do for communities that have been historically minoritized, disenfranchised, abused, etc. And that is true. But it's more than that. It's that those communities, or our communities, have a lot to offer. And so my whole career has been balancing the notion of preaching about the disadvantage that we face as a community, while at the same point in time trying to uplift the humanity that's also in the community. That while we have been abused, we are not damaged. And that was a frame that I learned early on from my mother, and trying to, that's sort of driven up what I've tried to do in this particular space.
Thank you. And I'm glad that's actually a great segue to thinking about the next question that I was going to ask. I've been in universities for a good period of time now, and as you've been involved with university since the 80s, I have as a student, and then as a graduate student, and a graduate student again, and as a faculty member, and so on. You've seen a lot of conversations evolve, or sometimes repeat themselves over time, and sometimes the names change over time. So we used to talk about affirmative action in the 80s, and it was diversity, multiculturalism, and now we have diversity, equity, and inclusion, and DEI. So I think I want to ask each of you, why DEI? What does the D, what's the importance of the E and the I in addition to the D? In terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, how does it go beyond things that have been discussed before, or conversations that have occurred, or actions that have occurred in the past, or not occurred? Anyone wants to go first on that? We can sign a letter to each.
Well, I'll jump in there. So again, DEI, as already been said, is one more instantiation of a 300+ year battle around justice, equity, you name the word. As long as there's been anything close to a concept of, actually even before a concept of the United States of America, that has been a fundamental challenge with regards to what has happened on this space. To me, DE&I is one more strategy to try to get us closer to a space of equity, which I'll talk about in a second, where everyone, first and foremost, is valued. Second, is given an opportunity to contribute and provided that which they need to be able to contribute to the larger, greater good, and that the contributions that everyone can make and have the ability to make are allowed to be made. That's to me what diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity, its value is in the notion that each of us is different, and in the context of a university, it is, I would argue, the most important factor in terms of achieving excellence. So, University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, unique place. On the one hand, it's a public institution. On the other hand, it is one of the most elitist institutions that you will ever come across. So we go around and we pump our chest out and we say we are leaders and best. We have no doubt about the fact that we are leaders and best. We strive to be leaders and best. We were set up uniquely to be leaders and best and to push for all of that. So all of that elitism that comes into play with respect to that. But you cannot be the best. You cannot reach your fullest potential as an institution of higher education without innovation, new ideas, different ideas. And the most important part of a university and of being in college, I always tell my students, people are smart not because they have all the answers, but because they ask the right questions. And the right questions only come from our lived experience. So when you ask the initial question, it's not a surprise that the reason why we're all up here is based on our experience in the world. And the fact of the matter is that different identities have different experiences in the world. And those different experiences lead you to see problems differently. And when you see problems differently, you have a better chance of actually coming up with the answer. I often tell people, if I had $1 million and you had 4 people that you could work with, and I had a problem that you had to solve, would you want 3 other people who know exactly what you do, who've had exactly the same experience and who's going to go at it? Or do you want 3 other people who have different kinds of experiences and different strengths, different things that they know that you don't know, et cetera, if you were trying to solve that problem? Well, that's basically what we try to do as a university. That's what makes us supposedly elite, is being able to solve these big problems. And if we as a society are going to solve these big problems, we need all hands on deck. We need all the experiences in the room. So that's why diversity is important. But if I have that same analogy and you're sitting at the table and you said, okay, well, we've got this diversity. Well, diversity doesn't work. You don't get the benefit without also equity and inclusion. So if of those 4 people in the room with you, if 2 of them are not allowed to speak just because of who they are, and the third may be allowed to speak, but 5 minutes before coming in, they were questioned as to whether or not they actually belong to you, just based on their identity. What do you have? You might have a diverse space, but it's not helpful. So the 3 of them have to come together. Not only will that benefit those folks who traditionally not been here, more importantly, we as a society cannot afford those voices being lost. Cannot afford, given the problems that we face, whether it's the environment, war, disease, any area, we need all hands on deck. And so that's our argument for diversity, equity, and inclusion at the University of Michigan. And the reason that we pitch that argument is because that is the argument that is consistent with the values of the University of Michigan. If I were at Michigan State, my argument would be, well, Michigan State is a land-grant institution. And in its founding, it's fundamentally about serving the entire state of Michigan. And if you look around, the entire state of Michigan isn't represented. And so in order for Michigan State to do its job, you have to have diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the argument is DEI is central to success as opposed to an add-on. Because if it is an add-on, And it's the morally right thing to do. While that's important, the morally right thing to do is the first thing that goes when resources get tight. The morally right thing to do depends on whose morals you're talking about. Again, not that it's not, but this is all strategic in terms of how we're trying to make change with the institution. And if you're going to change an institution, you have to understand how the institution works.
So I can follow up on that to our other panelists. One of our colleagues at the University of Michigan, Professor Rogerio Pinto, has done a wonderful little video on this topic, in which he concludes that diversity without equity and inclusion is only a performance, right? And so that's really an important point, but you're making that, having representation of different groups doesn't mean anything if those groups aren't also at the table or included in decision-making processes. But let's turn to the other sectors, and we talked about the university, but what about, Jessica, you work in the private sector and the business sector, and Steve in sort of the religious space and the community space. Maybe you can talk about, what the inclusion part means in addition to the diversity part for you.
Wow, there's so much. I'm so glad you're here. I will, yes, let me backfill some of what Rob said about the private sector. The one thing that was not mentioned that I will add, particularly from the business perspective, is that you will lose your people if you don't create space for inclusion and equity. That's not where they're going to stay. They don't find their sense of belonging, they don't find their value, they don't find their worth, they don't find opportunities to thrive and succeed and show their full potential. Other people get credit for their work. They get dismissed, they get ignored, they're gone. They're going to take their line on their resume. They're probably not going to give you feedback because they're going to need a good reference on the way out the door. And then they're going to take their talents somewhere else where they do find those things. So when you're thinking about recruiting, when you're thinking about retaining, when you're thinking about moving folks through the organizational structure and into leadership positions, if you're not thinking about the equity and the inclusion, the diversity is going to leave anyway. And so all of the things that Rob said are absolutely true, but if you're worried about your bottom dollar, that also adds up there.
Yeah, so it's true, we're an interfaith organization, we were the greater interfaith movement. In 2009, that portfolio left us, and we really looked at systems change and conflict resolution and racial social justice matters. But we've also had a business where we've engaged clients in all different sectors. And we just finished 3 years DEI with the Canton Township government, United Way Board, police departments, businesses, right? So, and we get calls every day. If I told you how many times I've got a call asking for a 2-hour session on implicit bias, it just drives me crazy. But for a lot of people, that's what they think they need. But I guess for me, the inclusion and equity side, you just see the harm that's being done to people in organization, and the false expectations set up when people do run a 2-hour session on implicit bias, and people of marginalized identities aren't heard, don't have voice, aren't part of the strategy. I have just a few anecdotes. It's a local business. I'm going to try really hard not to let you figure out what I'm talking about. So the gentleman is the president, and he says to me over lunch, he says, we just formed African American employee-related group, like I should pat him on the head. And so my first response was, we've given them the agency. And he looked at me like, what's that? And I was also speaking up in Grand Rapids at a large international company. Somehow I ended up being their DEI speaker, lucky than me. But the question afterwards was, and it's a Christian-owned company, so they have no agenda or strategy for their LGBTQ employees, like a don't ask, don't tell, primitive era. But afterwards I got done, well, how do our gay colleagues bring their whole self to the workplace? And I'm like, man, you're asking a heterosexual from Detroit. It sounds weird, a person. But anyway, if you don't know who your colleagues are in this workplace that are gay, that's a form of poverty here that says they not feel safe to come out. But I think the first job is to find out who they are and then ask them that question. Because as Washington County Assistant Prosecutor Victoria Britton-Harris says, and she's recording a common statement, but those that are closest to the problem are closest to the solution, and allowing them to form the strategy. And I think so many times in organizations, like in the city of Livonia, the mayor re-racked the Human Relations Commission with 2 other white folk and brought some token people of color to serve on it without any power. When you see this time and time again, oh, I let out it was Livonia, but no surprise. I should have moved back there to try and see if I could help, really presumptuous. But I think without the equity, so when we have clients now, we want to know, do they have a stomach for an assessment, a racial equity audit? Can they take a developmental approach to engaging in these areas? Not a 2-hour session, but where their performance evaluation and any compensation is based on how well they do with peeling away the layers of ignorance that they have. And then how does their corporate social responsibility, how is it viewed through a racial and social justice framework? Because when it's a charitable framework, it's just more tokenism, white saviorness that I'm recovering, white saviorness. But anyway, you can tell I'm trying to recover from that because my initial comment, I came into this as I'm a savior. So anyway, it sounds weird saying that, but some of you folks know what that means. So, I mean, it's that humility that's needed to be someone who can listen and learn what does it mean to be a co-liberationist or an ally, and that takes a lot more humility. But I think the equity piece, with that ought to be the first thing that's set up before we harm any more people with the different forms of macro, microaggressions, and other harms. I know I didn't answer your question, but I'm running for office and I got out what I wanted to say.
I really like to create what each one said about the reasons why, sort of a business case, right? Like, we do this actually because it's for the organization, it's in their own interest to do this. But there are a lot of people who have different ideas about what DEI is, even if there are people that really say, we want to do this, we don't know how to do it, we want to do it. So one of the biggest misconceptions about DEI that you encounter, either in the home or in the public sphere, I don't want to, I will. Actually, our conversation about this panel started with Felix and I talking about Elon Musk doing a tweet where he said, DEI must die. Ron DeSantis, does anybody know Ron DeSantis? He made a statement, the left tells us DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion, but as practiced, it more closely represents discrimination, exclusion, and indoctrination. I mean, there was sort of this idea that's propounded, by some, not necessarily in good faith, that DEI is essentially exactly the opposite of what it claims to be. So we can sort of dispense with some of the nonsense, but still there are, I think, a lot of misconceptions that everyday people have about what DEI is and what it's about, and who benefits, right? So we should think about what are some of the biggest misconceptions that you have learned in doing the work that you do.
I would have said 4 or 5 years ago, I would have just answered your question and talked about some of the misconceptions. But I want to be very clear now, these are not misconceptions. We are under attack. Very clear. There are individuals who you can name who are bragging about what they're doing with respect to DEI, how they are framing it as anti-free speech, framing it as being anti-Jewish, framing it as being anti-Asian, framing it as being reverse discrimination, framing it as being a woke ideology, and again, misappropriating as often as happens the concept of woke, and creating this thing that is DEI now, that they will never ever define. They will never define. So I told you what DEI was, what diversity is, what equity is, what inclusion is. But then if you ask them, they can't define it. They say, oh, I know it when they see it. But they'll never, and they frame it in such a way that DEI is anything that you don't like. DEI is, well, if we got a problem with gays, DEI is that gay ideology is going to turn the world gay. If you believe that women have gone too far and you haven't been able to get ahead in the world because other people somehow have gotten opportunities that you haven't got, well, that's what DEI is about. If you think whatever you think is bad in the world, they framed it, that's what DEI is. So they say, there's too much DEI. DEI has taken over. DEI has changed the country in ways that are problematic. They'll never give you data. They'll never try to actually solve the problems of inequity. So say, okay, well, if DEI is the problem, then what is your solution for health equity, wealth, income, environmental, education, prison? All the things that we know and see that hopefully DEI can begin to be a part of the solution for. What is your solution? So if you can get rid of that, and mind you, a large portion of these individuals are extremely, not even wealthy, beyond what you would consider wealthy in terms of the resources they have, and ask them what is their solution. So I'm happy to get rid of DEI tomorrow if you have something that is going to actually work better. But all of these are individuals for whom getting rid of that inequality hurts them. So you say, affirmative action. We need to get rid of affirmative action. Affirmative action discriminates against, let's say, affirmative action in education, in higher ed, discriminates against white kids and gives those other kids that don't like me, but you know who we're talking about, all this advantage. And if you listen to them, you would think that the University of Michigan Ann Arbor was Howard University. I wish we were so effective that we've done, but it isn't. You see the inequality that's there. There's no discussion, no effort to address those things, but the idea, you all are starting to do stuff that may, in some way, threaten my position of power and privilege. Let me cross all that out. The other thing, and then I'll shut up for a little bit, just for a little bit. It's getting busy. The other thing is what is new, what has happened is the targeting of this is no longer to the right. And I don't even mean this in terms of the political with the big P, but the right, the folks that you would think the target is really to the left, the moderate left, in framing. So you look at the pitting DEI against Jewish and saying DEI is somehow inherently anti-Semitic and hasn't been supporting the Jewish community. When you look at the data, that's not true. You look at who's been involved and where the efforts have been, it's not true. But that has been a way of saying, well, if that's the case, then I can't really be a part of something that's anti-Semitic because that's against my moral beliefs. Or DEI is really after everyone and is saying everyone is oppressors and everyone else isn't oppressors, and it's gone too far. I was for it after the racial reckoning, that was so bad. I was for it. But now it feels inconvenient. It's time for it to go away. And that's where much of this, the sickness of the strategy, that's where the strategy is aimed at. It's not to the right, it's to the moderate left. So you're reading places that you thought were at least honest, if not sympathetic, to now are feeling like, well, I don't really know about this anti-DSE. They were, anti-Semitic. See what happened with the Harvard president? You see what they were actually saying? Well, no, if you actually read what they said what was actually true, which those very same Congress people were pushing for a few months before that, well, DEI is anti-free speech. And when the president said, look, our policies are such that while I would condemn that and did condemn it personally in terms of the attacks, we as an institution that values free speech cannot abridge that speech. If you change the words and didn't say anti-Semitic, and you said racist, those very same folks would have no problem. Not only would they have no problem, they had no problem during the racial reckoning. There were no hearings. Those universities weren't called up to see how we can solve anti-Asian hate. Many of them were also pushing it. The China flu, da 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 da. So this is, but yet the backlash isn't from the far right, it's literally from the middle left. And that's going to be the difference. Some of those very same folks who were all down with DEI 4 years ago, 5 years ago, are now like, oh, no, let's move on to the next thing. So, thank you. Sorry.
We're going to delve, I think, a little bit later into some of the politics of the day and some of the issues that you alluded to. But I'm thinking of, there are those who I said were bad actors and acting in bad faith, and there's sort of critiques or misconceptions, or not misconceptions, they're misrepresentations about DEI that are deliberate and have a strategy behind it. But at the same time, I think it's also fair to say there are a lot of misconceptions. Let's think about everyday, inside the workplace types of misconceptions about what it means to be, to attend a DEI workshop, or what it's about, or who it's for, right? This idea that it's somehow, it's like, as you said, it's for those people, or to help somebody who's, and also the flip side of that is conceiving of it as a zero-sum kind of a game, that it's some are benefiting and others are not. And I feel like these are also not really what DEI is actually about. So I'm wondering if you can think about it in your work that you do, some of the sort of well-meaning misconceptions that you might encounter, as opposed to the toxic ones, which we touched on.
Thank you. Boy, you got me going. I've got to now have a different question. I was ready to. But I think, that one of the things people bring to the sessions we do is deep in their DNA is this internalized misogyny and forms of oppression, racism, and it could be generational trauma. It could be like with our French movement, this internalized colonialism they bring. This stuff is in us, and it's in our institutions. And if it's not addressed, we don't begin with a deep look at that. It's just going to be chaos. And I think so I see when we have sessions of 100 people here, whatever. You just look at the room, you go, that they don't want to be there. They're here to be disruptors. It's just a mixed bag, and if you don't have a structured organization where the leader is so clear on how this ties to the values, how this ties to productivity, so it puts. But there's some hope. I remember when the Iranian president called for Holocaust denial, and an older rabbi took me aside and said, "Why do you think they do that, Steve?" And I said, "Tell me, Rabbi, because they feel like the Holocaust wasn't successful in the first place. That is to say, they really want all Jews dead. So when people are anti-critical race theory, I mean, it's like this transparency that, folks that really are clinging to that white supremacist, Christian supremacist toxic marriage, that they don't like black folk, and they don't like the other, and they have resentment, and that's nasty stuff, right? I don't think I probably answered your question the way you wanted, but you find that you're trying to then think, how do we create a strategy with whoever before you want this DEI leader that'll be there 1.8 years, which is the average lifespan for a professional, and then they're gone. It's really hard, and I think a longer-term strategy that takes the elephant out of the room really takes an analysis of history that then begs the question of how can you not take a developmental approach to deal with this? But there's no quick fix, eh? So, can you answer what you wanted?
I want to first speak to Rob's point, and then I'll answer the question. So in terms of the reverse racism, or and yes, absolutely, sometimes it's strategic in the way they say that, but there are a lot of people who genuinely believe that we could probably, it's countless how many people who are white in particular ask us why their kid did not get accepted into Michigan. And it's very clearly a loaded question. They think they already know the answer. And so, I think the most common misconception is that DEI does not benefit everyone. And the data actually shows DEI does benefit everyone. Do people from marginalized communities benefit more? Yes, but only in so much as the disparities already exist. But everyone benefits in spaces where they find a sense of belonging and value and the opportunities and the resources they need to thrive. That's just true across the board. But for me, the most frequent misconception honestly happens even with people who are DEI advocates. And that is this belief that if we could just talk about, getting rid of prejudice, that would fix it. And, yes, it's going to require folks who understand bias, who understand how to be kind and respectful to one another to do this work. But that doesn't actually change anything because the system's already built. And so the hardest thing for us in this work, I think, is constantly reminding people the reason why a 2-hour workshop doesn't work is because you're just teaching people manners. That's about it. You might teach them a little bit of compassion. You might help them open their understanding and empathy, and that's important. But you also have to compel them to care enough to now go back and look at your policies and your procedures and your systems and understand this is a very long endeavor. It's not going to change tomorrow. And if you set people up to expect that it will, it's going to create a lot of harm. And so part of my job when I do go in and do these trainings all the time is really making sure level set those expectations and naming systems over and over and over again. We do need to reduce bias. We do need to reduce discrimination. Those are the only people that are going to do this work, are the people who have reduced their bias and their discrimination, who understand the implications. But at the end of the day, somebody actually has to address the systems in order to create the meaningful change that we're trying to create here.
Wow, so spoken like a true sociologist, because you brought in systems and structure.
There you go.
And so I wanted to talk about another criticism of DEI, which comes from other quarters. And I'm interested in how you respond to this criticism, both sort of internally or in your own mind and also in your own institutions, that the DEI and its predecessors, to a greater or lesser extent, affirmative action programs, multiculturalism, diversity, etc., also function as a way of achieving social justice or deep-rooted change, but actually of effectively co-opting it, controlling it, redirecting it, diffusing movements of social justice, liberation, or decolonization. In Dr. Sellers mentioned earlier the University of Michigan's history, and I've been reading Matthew Johnson's book, Undermining Racial Justice, which focuses on the case of the University of Michigan, where Johnson argues that UMM media has incorporated Black student dissent selectively into the students' institutions, policies, practices, and values, and it is consistently in different ways over time. The strategy refers to prevent activism from disrupting institutional priorities that campus leaders deem more important than racial justice, including with all this, according to Johnson, the secondary priority, the primary priority, Jerry alluded to was maintaining University of Michigan status as an elite institution. So there is also this criticism that comes from sometimes inside the institution and sometimes from outside. And really, how you reflect on that and how they respond to that. Strong criticism.
So, trying to decide if I'm going to be personal or not. So, first, just again echo what Jessica and Steve were saying in terms of what we're actually talking about, and where people get scared is when you start talking about changing systems, redistributing power, redistributing wealth, redistributing leadership and control. That doesn't happen in a 2-hour session, whatever that session is, even with whoever the boss is. So one of the things that is very clear to me in my experience at the University of Michigan. So I went there as a graduate student. I was actually very active as a graduate student. Actually, I didn't see Mr. Johnson in any of those spaces where he quoted certain things, or he never spoke to me in terms of what the DEI was. And so I would have very different notions of, different interpretations of what was being done in the frame than he would. But there is, the fact of the matter is, the number one goal of power is always to first keep power, and then second, to get more power. The number one goal of any institution is to. So, the reality is, the University of Michigan thinks it's great when faculty are hiring other faculty. They know they're great. Why? Because it hired them. And if it hired them, they know what they're doing, it must be right. So we must continue to hire people that are like me, because that's the way it works. That's the way it works, unfortunately. So we have to break that down, and that does not happen overnight. That does not happen one person at a time. That does not happen in terms of changing minds. So as a psychologist, on the psychologist side, I never really cared, if I could get to your heart and I could change how you thought, that was great and fine, but all I cared about is how you behave. How do we make it so that if you're at the University of Michigan and we're doing this, you have to behave in a particular way that is consistent with diversity, equity, and inclusion. You can hate it. You can disagree with it. You can go work someplace else. Again, the example I often use is, we have a responsibility at the university to be good stewards of the university money. As administrator, they gave me a nice little P card, which allowed me to buy things that are for the university, for travel and things like that are in there. And as a member of the university, I might think that, what would help me do my job better is a brand new big screen TV. I think that's what I need. But I know good and well, the University of Michigan, if I'm working there and I'm going to be in that environment, I have to behave in a particular way. So there's no big screen TV for me. So changing behavior and changing the structures that value certain behaviors versus other behaviors is the only way that you're going to have long-term systemic change. That's the other piece, is this stuff didn't happen overnight. And it ain't gonna change overnight. So we say affirmative action. Affirmative action effectively lasted generously 10 years. And it never was ever actually effectively and completely implemented. 10 years out of 350. And was never fully, completely implemented. And we say, it was a failure. Didn't work. led to reverse discrimination. No, it just provided opportunities for people who, in one situation, did not get the outcome that they wanted to be able to blame someone else. If you want to think about this, think about going to a concert and you're driving around looking to park. And you can't find any place to park. But up front, you see these 10 empty handicap spots. And while you're driving around and you can't find any place to park, you're saying, see, they got my spot. Well, good and well, even if you had gotten there 2 hours earlier, you weren't getting that spot. But you're blaming those spots for you not getting into a place that you wouldn't have gotten into otherwise. So I'm now giving you an excuse for why you didn't get in, when you said, why you didn't get into the University of Michigan. See, that kid right there has got my spot. And I'm like, we ain't got enough black kids to have all these spots that ain't there. I wish that was the case. I wish that was the case, or any other particular space. So these misconceptions are that any kind, what can happen is it can be framed that any kind of advancement from one group, or even worse, any lack of advancement from one group, can be blamed on trying to help another group that had even less of a spot opportunity to get in. And to find, oh yeah, well, that's the one right there. That's the one that has my spot. I see that person didn't do as well, it wasn't as highly, didn't do quite as well in the thing, and so they took my spot. Now, they're not pointing to the individual who scored a touchdown in to win the national championship. We got to have him. We're going to make a spot for him. That's right. But we're not going to take the valedictorian from that same class, from that same school, high school. So that's part of the, and again, part of it is a misconception, but part of it is, again, part of a long-term strategy of crabs in a barrel. And the folks throwing the barrels like, see, it's their crabs, so the reason why you're not getting out, instead of looking at. So, look at the crabs, look at the barrel, look at the barrel. Something we say in sociology.
Yes, we do.
So, Steve, you want to follow up on that?
Nailed. We have a grant to look at the racialized outcomes in the criminal legal system.
Right.
And we're looking at the racialized outcome in the criminal legal system, and it's data collection, it's storytelling, and it's reimagining, but it's, no individual police chief comes to work on a Monday morning and decides he's going to jam up any marginalized population. Might have been a 2-hour session on implicit bias at the academy or something. When you look at his courthouse on a Monday morning, 9 out of the 10 people don't look like him. And so it's that system change, but you all nailed it, so I'll save all my goodies for the next question.
Well, so Jessica, I was wondering, you work at the university side and sort of the corporate private side. Do you see something or the idea that a DEI program, rather than being a way to achieve change, might be actually a substitute for change? And is that an issue you face or criticism you hear in the organizations that you work in?
Yeah, absolutely. In the DEI space in particular, it's a very niche conversation of DEI workers challenging each other about who's going to be most assertive and most explicit about the needs and the changes that we should be demanding. And I'm going to agree with Rob and say I don't think it's a fair criticism to say that we're diffusing a liberation movement. We are operating within a capitalist system, and that has its own restrictions. But I do think it's fair to challenge anyone who's doing this work to really be clear on what their values are, what they're going to stand up for, what their boundaries are, but also to be honest about what we're promising. And so for me, I really caution people, and I would reserve this not for Steve. I think Steve is on the right line of work for this. But for a lot of other people, I really caution them about including the word justice in any of the work that they're doing, because it's disingenuous. We're in a capitalist system. Justice is not gonna be here. That is out there, that's the barrel, right? And so, but I think that we work in partnership. We are in support of our activist brothers and sisters, right? But we're doing something parallel inside of a system. At the same time, so many of us are also doing both, and that's all of us on this stage, doing both. We are in the work environment, we're in the system. I think it's very easy to argue that all of the gains and steps that we're trying to make for equity is revolutionary within a capitalist system. And so I don't want people to discount what we're trying to do there, even though it's not going to be the same thing as what you're seeing people marching for every single day. And a lot of us are doing both of those things. So I think it's important that we kind of have those conversations in a way to recognize there is a lot of work to do and lots of different inroads to make there.
Yeah, I would also just add, see, I don't understand if the goal is to achieve diversity, equity, and inclusion, how you don't get to justice. And I don't understand how you get to justice without having some diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I always felt like that argument, that framing of, well, we should be focusing on justice versus focusing on diversity, equity. All I care about is the outcome. And how we get there and how we label it, that's something that we can talk about once we get there. But until we get there, for us to argue over that is just energy wasted and is actually doing those who would oppose us work for us. Because any energy that we're fighting with each other about a perspective is problematic. Because that's energy that is not being used to make change. And so that's the other piece about diversity. Fact of the matter is, we all got different views. Everybody in this room has a different view. No two people in here are the same. And that's the challenge sometimes from a diversity perspective. We essentialize people based on their identity and assume that all Black people are the same, or all Asian people are the same, or all people with disabilities are the same, and they all believe the same. No. If you think that's the case, go to a barber shop, or a beauty shop, or the church, or the basketball court. We all over the space. We're all over the place across the thing. But we have to have the space to allow for long arguments about philosophically what we're supposed to do, but not as if one is keeping the other down.
So speaking of that, sort of road from diversity and inclusion to justice, Steve, I want to put you on the spot a little bit, because last time we spoke, you told me that the roundtable for diversity and inclusion is actually undergoing a name change. Is that correct? You can read, I don't know if this is going to be fresh news, is this going to be like a big announcement? And you already feel it's about the change.
Yeah, so in May, we'll publicly announce our name. We begin socializing it. We're going to work with the Twisted Storytellers to have 4 storytellers to talk about what is a just community to them. And then you can fill in the rest. That'll be a part of our name. But in 2005, when we took on the DEI name, it didn't have any baggage. It was just fresh and new, but not evergreen. So no, that's the space, right? But the whole community involves, the organizations, but how are we connected to the people that might run the parking lot next to our store, the place we go to get our lunch, and we're going to try to help develop those relationships in a deeper way. So, yeah, we have a name change, don't we?
Okay, so
Need a Michigan roundtable for something I was talking about.
stay tuned. Stay tuned. So I didn't mention
That's smart is.
I want to leave some time for the questions to the right. Maybe we have a few more questions. I didn't to toss, like a topics like that. And so this is a light topic, not really, but so I'm treating it as a light topic. Let's talk about pronouns, right? why are pronouns at the root? Why do people get so upset, shall we say, some people triggered by the idea that we need to clarify what pronouns we use? What is the importance and significance of pronouns? And why do you think the discussion of pronouns is such a charged discussion in the public sphere? For those who make fun of the practice of people clarifying their pronouns on the one hand, as though it's just silliness, and those who decry the practice as some kind of Orwellian, policing of language. So what have been some of your pronoun experience?
Let's see what it
Well, that's a good
Okay, so my pronouns are she, her. And pronouns are important because it's aligned with how we identify, what our gender identity is. And so that immediately triggers a lot of folks. I prefer activate as opposed to trigger, but it immediately activates a lot of folks because it opens a much longer conversation about sex and gender being different, about gender being a continuum, and about gender not necessarily aligning with the sex assigned at birth. But these are core to the value and the identity, the lived experience, and the mental health of each individual in their gender identity. So typically what happens for folks that are confused about this is because their gender identity and the sex they were assigned at birth align. And so they don't think about how their pronouns might be different. They don't think about themselves even as cisgender, even though that's technically the term that we would use there, because they just exist. And the thing that we understand about privilege is that if you have it, you don't have to think about it. You don't have to question where it came from, it's just the default. But there's a whole world of folks out there, and increasingly a larger number. So each generation that gets younger has a higher percentage of folks who identify as non-binary, meaning not male, not female, something along the continuum. There's a lot of different names for that, depending on which one of their identities they hold. And so what happens if you misgender someone, and so they tell you that their pronouns are she, her, and you use he, him, or they tell you that their pronouns are they, them, and you use he, him. If it's an accident because you're not used to it, you're still learning, you forget, it doesn't immediately track for you in terms of what you're seeing presented, or you have a relationship with this person that goes back years and they've transitioned and you're still adjusting. Making a misstep once in a while is absolutely understandable, and almost everyone I know is very understandable and accepting of that. What they're looking for is an acknowledgement that, oh geez, I'm so sorry, I realize I just used the wrong pronouns, I meant to say, and then you go on. And actually, if you make a big deal out of it, that it's even more uncomfortable. Like just, oh, sorry, and then use the correct pronoun. It is the people who maliciously misgender and demean people to invalidate their gender identity and make them feel even more vulnerable and more marginalized and more invisible. And frankly, more at risk in terms of their personal safety, that people have those kinds of reactions. But the people who are activated by pronouns are the ones that don't understand gender as a continuum. And so they don't want to have that conversation. And so it's a challenging space, particularly in a work environment. So I'll go back to best practices here. In the workforce, we have 5 different generations working together at the same time. So you've got boomers on one end, where the percentage of non-binary is minuscule. And then you've got Gen Z coming in at a faster rate. So they're replacing boomers very quickly in the work environment. Over 20% of them identify as something not cisgender. And if they themselves identify as cisgender, they still have all these friends and partners who are non-binary and are expecting not only to find a sense of belonging for themselves, but also like, could I bring my partner to a lunch or a holiday party? Am I allowed to hang pictures up? If somebody asks me what I did for the weekend, am I allowed to say these things, right? So that gets complicated really fast when you're trying to create an environment that's inclusive and that's equitable, when people feel like they can't even share their pronouns without being denigrated. And so it is really important. And to go back to Rob's point, it's not, hearts and minds, fine, separate conversation. But behavior in the workplace, you use the pronouns that the person uses, full stop.
mind.
Another way that I would also come at this is there's a level of respect. So for me, thinking about this and someone who actually studies identity and the need for people to be able to define their own experience and their existence as opposed to, to be able to define who they are is one of the most fundamental experiences that one actually has. And the most important way of control that one actually has. And this is, now as an older person, in that first generation, or that last, whichever direct, in that boomer generation, I'm old enough to remember in my own experience where some people call themselves Negro, some people call themselves colored, some people call themselves Afro-American, some people call themselves Black, and other people within the same community had different notions of what that meant. Soul brother, we Negroes have a common, different from others. They call us soul brothers. So that defining, so recognizing, I remember the differences in older generations say, no, you're not colored, or how dare you call yourself Black? That was an insult, and so being able to define oneself and having enough respect to say, I might not understand it, but this is clearly important in terms of how you're defining yourself. I can either be mad because I have to learn something different, this is really, it's all about you, or I can take the time, if I'm not going to take the time to learn about the experience, I can at least give you the respect of allowing you to define yourself and going with that. And so there's, at the end of all this, or at the bottom of all this, is also a level of, are you willing to give others the same respect that you demand from yourself? For yourself.
I think that's actually an important point, and if you think about this, when you were saying earlier about if your experience is privilege, the loss of privilege feels like a punishment to you. And it's something, there's a parallel in terms of being able to use the language that I want to use. Like, so I'm used to being able to call these people this and these people that, and now you're telling me that they don't want to be called that anymore, that feel, you're telling me, so rather than thinking about that person, you're thinking about how I can't use those words I used to use, and so therefore I'm the one who's oppressed. So I think that's a similar dynamic that we see, but before we wrap up, and we're getting near the end of our time, I did come on sort of pose again the question that came up before about the current political climate, both our domestic political climate with its extreme polarization, but also the challenges posed by world global issues, in particular the situation in Gaza, occupation of Palestine, and the challenges the complications, the challenges that's posing to the work of DEI, but also what does DEI have to offer in terms of thinking about how do we address this issue in a way that is not compounding harm, but is instead building community.
I'll tell you, I thought about that a lot. 30 years of internet work. I know a lot of people who are Jewish and Palestinian. We've also had this prohibition against speaking out about these rights. So I'm sort of in a way bound, but I think the people closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And how do we lift up a shared narrative from, I think, our Palestinian and Jewish friends that they can hear each other, feel each other's pain to the extent that they then get to the place where maybe they can speak about what needs to be done there, what needs to be done here where we live together. But I think that the principle of, centering the voices of those that are harmed, and there's a lot of harm on both sides. My friend Rashida Tlaib, when she spoke at a prayer vigil, she named the names of all the kids killed in Palestine, in Gaza, and she remembered the names of the kids killed in Israel. I mean, that's anti-Semitic, right? No, it's not anti-Semitic, but the ability to feel the other's pain and then work with them to define not someone who's outside of the conflict. So I think allowing people in that space to be able to hear each other and care for each other, I think maybe bring some of the DEI principles in there. I feel like a bystander, quite honestly. I'd like to scream, stop the killing, but I'm a drawbridge between both communities.
And you mentioned earlier, Dr. Sellers, about how in the recent congressional hearings, in a way, the sort of traditional script was flipped in that the idea that some people's protection is somebody else's freedom, is impinging on somebody else's freedom of speech. And I thought it was very disingenuous what was done in those hearings, but nonetheless, I think it did sort of put universities in the spotlight in terms of how they're managing the very, very active and very emotional debates that are taking place on our campuses around protection and safety of some on one hand, but also the right to expression, especially around politics and injustice and social change.
So one of the things that I learned over my 8 years as chief diversity officer is that willing to trade other people's safety for their own rights. And those very same people are also willing to trade other people's rights for their own safety. So I feel like there's a disingenuousness around what is morally right and righteous in particular spaces. So there are some, and I do mean some, where the reaction is any kind of humanization of the other is seen as attacking those who are victims to begin with. And that any kind of notion of humanism that would recognize the loss of life on both sides and evil done on both sides is somehow seen as attacking one's group. That you have to be all in demonizing the other in order for you to actually be on the side. That's not DEI. On either side, that's not DEI. In fact, DEI, one of the challenges is that DEI is not a utopia. Getting to a place of DEI is not going to be a place where everything's easy and everybody gets along. By definition, you're going to have tremendous conflicts when you have diverse voices. Doesn't lead to consensus. It's, in fact, the exact opposite. And so along with that, we have to understand that we also do, it's probably going to be contradictory to it, we also have to have some moral fiber, moral opinions, a humanism, a spiritualism that underlies that says all life is valued. All perspectives are valued. Doesn't mean I agree with you. Doesn't mean that we're going to come to a solution with everybody in the room with different views, and at the end of the day, we come up with the exact same view. No. But we have to also be able to live with those various viewpoints and live with in a space that says you matter every bit as much as I do. And I matter every bit as much as you. And what bothers me about the DEI and the way it has been weaponized, in terms of, or I should say, that God's word has been weaponized against the DEI, is that this was planned. This was planned. This didn't just sort of happen. This was planned by a group of individuals whose goal was to undermine the notions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And whether you care about diversity, equity, and inclusion or not, fundamentally it was weaponized against efforts to try to address inequality in society. And it has been utilized in ways that are very, very effective. It has used pain, people's real pain in a particular way, to silence some, and really not out of caring for the other, but just really the exploitation of the other.
Jessica, do you want to make the last comment from your perspective?
Yeah, and thank you both so much for your remarks. I think that another piece that DEI brings to this current situation also comes out of the University of Michigan, which is intergroup dialogues. And so many of us have deep training and expertise in how to hold conversations across lines of difference that are very hard, that are very challenging, that are very personal, that are very emotional, in a way that is productive and healing. And the hardest part for me in the last several months, because I'm not personally connected, and I appreciate the comment that people closest are the ones with the solutions to what's happening over there. But watching what's happening to our community has been really hard. That people cannot have conversations. And I have managed to do this with my staff of over 100 people over Zoom multiple times. And they were amazing, and they were beautiful, and they were powerful, and they were tragic. Multiple staff members who have family in Israel and in Gaza who have been killed in this war. But we're able to share those stories and able to talk about how this has impacted them and the kind of support that they need from people like me. We're not having enough of those conversations, talking about how this has torn apart our communities in the process, because we've forgotten all of the tools that we have available to us. I do just want to pin, you didn't ask specifically, but political climate, I interpreted that differently in the initial call. I just want to bring to your attention, if you're not aware, there have been 78 bills proposed across 26 states in the last year, trying to dismantle DEI efforts across the country. 78 bills across 26 states in the last year, and there are more coming, right? That's scary, and it is having a very chilling effect, even in places like Michigan, where we feel like we have pretty solid footing on this. We have established data, we've got all the backing from our leadership. Even we are aware of the effect that this is having on us, and having, again, been very clear on our values and what we stand for, and where we're not willing to back down. And so that's the other part of this political climate, is how many people, because it's not convenient, because it's not popular, but now also because it comes with high risk, are walking away from the commitments that they've made to all of their folks.
In some ways, the revivals are specifically targeted at universities and institutions of higher learning for reasons that are not understandable. But how many of them are also targeting private corporations?
And law firms. Now they're going after law firms, which is really scary, because the law firms are the ones that obviously provide counsel to all the universities. The good news is very few of them have passed. I don't want to leave you with that like doomsday scenario. But please know there is like a flood of effort trying to shut this down, or at least slow it down. So there's a lot of pivoting going on and trying to rebrand in an effort to get out ahead of this and keep doing the work.
So, can we do the message that's heartening?
Let's go to the local 10.
Actually, it is where I'm heading. So we are getting around, questions from the audience. Yes, well, I thought you were telling me, I'd back up. But I'm gonna vote out to the audience. Do we have any questions from our audience for our distinguished panel? And I will bring the microphone to you, please introduce yourself, and I'll ask you a question. I'm gonna start at the back, and then come to the front. So we'll have three. How about that? Okay. So we have three hands here.
Yeah, hello. First of all, thanks, guys. Great discussion. I appreciate it, but my, I guess, question / concern is, you guys mentioned about the attacks on DEI. It's about 30 people in here. You gave a great presentation. I learned a lot. But the opposite, because people are making money, someone who is giving like misinformation, they will have maybe 1 million views on this. What do we do, or what suggestions to get good information out to the masses versus all the people who make it money for clicks with, like you say, on purpose, bad information?
So one, click, use your social media, but even, so in the context of the University of Michigan and Michigan State or Wayne State or any other state, I would strongly urge you to send a message to your president, to the board of regents, governing board. The boards are all elected politicians. And when they get lots of messages from other spaces, but they rarely get messages from the people. And you'll be surprised how effective a message is. So you'll be surprised how many hours are spent in administration because a regent got a message from somebody saying this is a particular problem. So your voice actually really does matter. And if it is something that you think is good happening, tell them. Tell them you think DEI should continue. And in fact, you should be doubling down on DEI. Because they will get the one that says, or get the 5 that will say, no, how dare you spend all this money on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and why are you letting these folks in? Why do you have spending money for center in Detroit when you're in Ann Arbor, so your voice does matter. And also spread the word. I'm not very social media savvy, but use your skills in that way to spread the word. And what you would like to see done better, done more of. A stronger relationship with Detroit. What does that look like?
You have agency.
You have unbelievable agency.
I want to thank the panel also. I wanted to ask Rob and Jessica though. You talked about DEI and how each letter, each thing. I would love to see that in a PowerPoint. So we can maybe have that and reflect back on that. My question was, you were the Detroit Unions, our Ford Motor Company, we have diversity committees. They're doing an hour of the salary. My question, now that we're referring to new trainings on diversity, when you look at the okay, you look about really Trump had a whole of like across the year. So as we move to like meeting and training about diversity, it's very good when you can put out one topic that we can get at the TCs more about diversity.
I promise you I'm not the white man whisperer. You know, I really try to help people. It sounds hokey, but it does work. And the psychologist here hopefully will back me up. If you come in with a softer approach, it's a little disarming. When people come into a training that they don't want to be at, they have already built up a resistance. And so I'm very kind, I'm very empathetic. I try to explain, and this is one where you might get some leverage with white folks or anybody else who's got resistance with this work. Diversity is not just about race, and it's not just about gender. It's about sexuality, it's about religion, it's about veteran status, it's about disability, and none of us is entirely privileged. So for a lot of folks, particularly in the population you're describing, where they get upset is that they don't feel like they have privilege. And they're not wrong in the sense that socioeconomically, they may be way behind, right? And the school districts where their kids go to school may be entirely under-resourced. They have things to be validly complaining about. But at the same time, helping them understand again that diversity, equity, and inclusion really does benefit everyone. So what does it mean to create tuition programs, for example, or educational programs, where you can go and get another certification? There's things that could benefit a lot of folks. Is it going to disproportionately benefit people from marginalized identities? Absolutely. But that's, again, as I said before, because those disparities already exist. But it's available for anyone, and it's going to lift all of those folks up together. So for me, when I start out these conversations in spaces where I'm anticipating resistance, I really do try to make sure everybody understands diversity in all its nuance and move it as far away from race exclusively as possible. We get to it, and I will say all the things, but it's also true. It's not just about race. It's not just about gender. And helping everybody understand that, honestly, is going to be more successful, I think, in the long run. But also, don't come hard.
Yeah.
They're already looking for a fight.
Yeah, I was gonna say, just as a white guy, who spends
Just please.
a lot of time with people who look like me, because I'm really trying to understand not just D'Angelo's murmuring on white fragility, but this resentment. But I think what I'm seeing is people really fear being called a racist. I remember one time returning Governor Snyder to speak out against that hateful mayor in Calcasta who wanted to kill everybody. And he wrote me, and as chief of staff took me aside, he goes, the governor doesn't have a racist bone in his body. And I looked at Rich Barron and I thought, pretty damn low bar. He was scurrying away like he was trying to say in or something. But anyway, I think folks, they don't want to be canceled. So people don't did research on moving people from a pro-death penalty point of view to an anti-death penalty. That used to be a thing, right? But he found his research showed that people that had a safe place, that were respectfully listened to, 95% of the time moderated to a life in prison without parole. And I think, and he said, support of the death penalty is a mile long, but an inch deep. This may be 20 miles long and 10 inches deep, but I just think you have to find a way for those people to wade into the water. That's hard, right? I think in our work, it's a safe place to get to a great place, but you want to throw up and use electroconvulsive therapy sometimes. But you know what I'm saying? I think you can bring some of those gentlemen, more than mercy. That's why you pay us big bucks to come to your organization. I'm sorry, I didn't throw down. Go ahead.
I just want to add one other thing. I get where you're trying to bring them in. You don't want to waste all of your valuable energy trying to convince the people that will not be convinced. It is the left, the middle left. Those folks, we can't afford to lose them. Right, so you find those people that are like, they're questioning, they're interested, they'd like to hear more. That's your target audience, right? Don't waste your energy on the people who are trying to burn your fuel.
Just to add one last thing in that context, and to put it in the terms of my father, you gotta meet people where they're at. So you're not going to, if you're looking to convert sinners, then you gotta go to the bar. You gotta go to the club. You gotta go where they are. And again, you have to talk with them about what their issue is.
Yeah, that's true.
And build connection there, and then show where there's some commonality and where, all of a sudden, this ain't all right either. We got some, I actually just tried to do that in the conversation around pronouns. That in order for me to think about, well, okay, as an African-American male, growing up and being able to define myself in so many different ways, okay, that makes absolutely perfect sense. That why should they not be able to define themselves and say, yeah, okay, I get it now. As opposed to if you treated me and say, oh, well, you were a football player, heterosexual football player in this context of heterosexualism, and you automatically are homophobic, and that's, well, then you're turned on. You're tuned out. So, meet them where they are.
Hi, Sharon Solomon. I kind of see DEI as a synonym for affirmative action. And I think that's the way a lot of people in our society see it. And because of that, I think it's going to be a hard sell. Folks who benefited from affirmative action were privileged. The main beneficiaries of affirmative action were white men. So they pushed it as something to benefit those who've been marginalized, but it didn't do enough for those who've been stigmatized, brutalized, and terrorized. And I think that we need something that focuses solely on that. Black folks and the pain, the suffering, because when you throw everybody else into it, we don't get the same fight.
Thank you for the conversation. It's been a good one. So I have a little bit of a selfish question. I appreciated the conversation around pronouns, why we use them, and certainly from a place of respecting people in terms of what they want to be called. That makes a lot of sense to me. I think some tensions that I've had in coming to meetings or coming to groups has been around being asked to identify my own in solidarity with those who are not cisgender. And, if I'm honest, sometimes I have a tension around how I want to identify myself when I'm entering a new space and how I want to introduce myself or talk about myself. So I'm just kind of curious, are there any perspectives in terms of how I should be thinking about that? Or, I don't know, might help me work through that.
I can tell you the best practice. If somebody is leading a conversation like this, they would say, and share your pronouns if you're comfortable. And so then the facilitator would share theirs. So like as soon as I started talking, I was like, my pronouns are she, her. Just so everybody knows, I'm cisgender, and I'm going to speak from a position of being cisgender who facilitates these conversations. But what it does is it normalizes for anybody else who might want to share their pronouns that it's okay to share here. That's still not a perfect answer though, and I appreciate where you're coming from, because now if you decide you don't want to share, it's like a different kind of pressure. And expecting people to share, they might not be able to people that they want to know their pronouns, whatever they are, right? So I absolutely appreciate that tension, and I think, one of the things, as Rob was saying earlier, DEI is not a panacea. There's so much stuff that is like changing in real time. When we like practice something, and we try this, and did this work, and well, it didn't land the way we thought it would, or we did this for a little while, and that doesn't quite meet the mark, and there's just multiple iterations. And so I think my hope would be if you're in a space where pronouns are offered, that it's at least couched in if you're comfortable, so that nobody feels like they have to share them. But I also want to recognize that even in that situation, if 9 out of 10 people share their pronouns and now it's your turn, it's super awkward and outs you in a different way if you don't share your pronouns. And so I don't know that there's a right answer there, other than nobody should be making everybody go around and share their pronouns. That part I do know is true. I don't know if you want to add to that.
I would agree. I think but again, it's unfortunately not a policy, and as you try to do this work, some people are going to feel more comfortable, some people are going to be less comfortable in different situations. And what's happening is when someone is uncomfortable in the situation around DEI, I would say that's what DEI is about. It's making people uncomfortable. It's making, like the laws around in Florida, well, in other places, literally a law that says you can't teach anything that makes kids feel bad about themselves. So you really shouldn't be able to teach much about anybody. So you have 200 years of laws that make Native people feel bad, should make Native people feel bad about themselves. 200 years of Black people feeling bad. 100 years of communities from Asia feeling that any number of the ways in which we define and the way in which education plays out, but there's never been a law that even came close to saying that that's the case. So I actually hope drilling that in those states that folks will file a whole bunch of lawsuits about how all of this makes me feel bad. Learn about George Washington, and you're not talking about him being a slave owner that makes me feel bad. Let me know about Thomas Jefferson, and you're not telling me about him not only being a slave owner, but being a rapist makes me feel bad. Let's. The fact that you want to talk about the civil rights movement there, well, that makes me feel bad. You didn't mention Malcolm X, that makes me feel bad. Whatever. If it's going to be about how our kids feel, let's sue. Let's just sue left and right and shut things down if that's the case. But that's the craziness in terms of what's happening. In terms of the anti-DEI.
So I think with that, so I'm going to be here at the Detroit Center, is one building community here in Detroit between the University of Michigan and the many communities of Detroit, the many diverse communities of Detroit. And our project for demystification, the Like DEI is an ongoing project, it's imperfect. We're not here about achieving perfection, we're out here about building community. And part of the building community is getting people together and listening to each other in good faith, right? And that's how solutions are developed. Like you said, let the people who are closest to the problem have the opportunity to develop the solutions. And the first step of that, I think we've got advice from two people. I'm going to go to the bar first. I'm going to Baker's Keyboard Lounge. But I'm going to recommend you go to a bar if that's not your thing. But I'm going to give you freedom to leave the original Detroit Center and go to every place. Solidarity and fellowship and yours. Thank you all for coming out tonight.
And then I'll put this in the crowd. Well, chicken steak.
He passed away while I'm under there. Yes, yes. Thank you.
Just trying to be faithful.
I know you do a hard
You know what? If you want to send me your notes, you can change your names on the cards. Anything in the market. Sure, I think